As usual, the shiurim are in memory of Elisheva Frist, Zechronah Livracha, Elisheva Sima, Bat Zalman. I'll also mention the 10th yahrzeit of my father-in-law this coming Friday, Kaftet Erev Rosh Chodesh Tammuz, Ahron Shlomo ben Yehuda Cohen. So being that we had Birkat HaChodesh on Shabbat, and you didn't have to be in shul to hear my Birkat HaChodesh. I'm sure your Birkat HaChodesh, wherever you davened, was equally valid. I wasn't the only guy in town to announce Rosh Chodesh, but every Shliach Tzibur for Musaf announced Rosh Chodesh Tammuz Yeh B'Yom HaShabbat Kodesh U'Mochato B'Yom Rishon Haba Aleinu L'Tova. So we have Rosh Chodesh Tammuz coming up, and because of that, I think this page is going to take us for 2 weeks, this week and next week, and it's going to deal with two topics that seem to be first cousins, but they are really very different, as we will see. And it's entitled Psukei de Zimra u'Pirkei Hallel. So Psukei de Zimra is all that preliminary readings of sections of Tillim that we say before Shacharis, and Shacharit technically starts with the bracha of Yotzer Or. Yotzer Or uvorei choshech oseh shalom v'oret hakol, which are the brachot of Kriyat Shema. That's technically the beginning of Shacharit, because Chazal instituted that even though there's an independent mitzvah to read Shema in the morning and in the evening, b'shoch b'chav kumecha, we should fulfill the mitzvah of reading Shema in the morning and in the evening, adjacent to our davening, our Shmoneh Esrei. I say davening, I mean here the Shmoneh Esrei, which is the core. The core tefillah is the tefillat Amidah, no matter if it's a weekday, Shabbat, Rosh Chodesh, Yom Kippur, Nila, that's the core. Everything before and after is extra, and we have to understand why the extras. So the Kriyat Shema with its brachot, the 2 before and 1 after in the morning, 2 before, 2 in the evening for Ma'ariv, the Kriyat Shema with its brachot are a necessary prerequisite to get into the whole of tefillah. Notice there's like a fee, an agra. You have to pay an admissions fee, and the admissions fee to get into the whole of tefillah, the heichal tefillah, is Kriyat Shema. Now, one of the reasons is that if you don't declare allegiance to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what in the world are you coming to Him and asking for something? Shema, a tefillah rather, is you're asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu for your needs. Whatever the needs may be. In the weekday, there are needs of our life. On Shabbat and Yom Tov, they're more spiritual needs, but they're needs. So we're always asking for something. You can't begin by asking for anything unless you're in the same camp with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You would declare independence. You declare allegiance, not independence, God forbid. Allegiance with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Fine, so that's Shema. Besides this, so that we understand. And if it's tefillah b'tzibur, if it's a tefillah in a community of a minyan, so tefillah b'tzibur will start with the Kaddish before Baruch Hu, and Baruch Hu kicks off the Yotzer Or u'Vorei Choshech. That's really what tefillah b'tzibur kicks off. Now, if you go to a Svaradi shul, and I don't mean a shtibel, Hasidic shtibel, where they daven nusach Sfarad. I'm talking about the Eidot HaMizrach, right? Those from North African background, in Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, Egypt, or the Babylonian, which was the Iraqi Jewish community, and so on, some from Turkey. So you have the Sfaradi, or some from Spain, but you don't have too many who are really can claim that they are from Spain. Some claim that those who signed their name Samach Tet means Sfaradi Tahor. It means that we're thoroughbreds, All the others are, just make believe Sfaradim, but we're the real ones. Sfaradi Tahor. So many of the Sfaradi Tahor, you won't find them in Spain any longer. And the only thing you'll find in Spain is remnants of Anusim, of what's called the Marranos. There are people who are remnants of descendants of Marranos. But Sfaradi Tahor, you're going to find in Italy. You're going to find Italian Jews. Now, I'll just say a word, that before the 16th century, when you said an Italian Jew, you meant Ashkenaz. Now, of course, Ashkenaz is northern France and Germany, so they never made it there, the Italian Jewish community, except that Ashkenaz Jewry as a minhag, as a custom, made it from Italy. It migrated north. So basically, Italy has a basic minhag, which stems from all places from Eretz Israel. That's already a story of the Chashmonaim era. And from there, it goes north. But in the 16th century, when there was the expulsion from Spain, so I'll just say that most Jews were not expelled from Spain. Why not? Because 60% became outward Catholic. Outward Catholic, 60%. And from the 40%, some were expelled, some died, were burnt on Kiddush Hashem. So that's what the 40%. And from those who were expelled, there are different routes. So one route is Morocco, but that didn't work out too well because the Spanish Jews, when they saw the Moroccan Jews, they had no interest in integrating because they were Spaniards, they were philosophers, and they were thinkers, and they were scientists, and these were primitive. That's a very positive word. More primitive, right? And they didn't want to integrate. It was a bad shidduch. The Spaniards with the Moroccan Jewish community. But then there were those who went to Amsterdam. And they went there because in Amsterdam at the time, in Holland, there was guarantee of freedom of religion. So you can do whatever you want. You want to be Jewish, you can be Jewish. Nobody's going to say anything to you. And from that Jewish community of Amsterdam, you have those who got on the boats of the Dutch West Indies Company to the New World, which we call America. And that's why the first Jews to hit the American shores were Spanish Jews and the institutions that they left, the Spanish-Portuguese synagogue, the TORAH synagogue, and so on. George Washington's finance minister, right, Chaim Solomon, and he's honored on every single dollar bill. There's a Magen David on the dollar. You just have to know where it is. You don't even need a microscope or a magnifying glass for it. You just have to know where it is, and it's there to honor Chaim Solomon, the first finance minister of the United States of America. He was George Washington's finance minister. And there's a very lovely letter that you can see in the TORAH synagogue in Rhode Island that George Washington writes to the shul and expresses his appreciation, and so on. Fine. So that's that line. But the other line of migration from Spain went to Eretz Yisrael, except most of them never made it. And in those days, El Al wasn't yet flying from Barcelona to Tel Aviv 4.5 hours nonstop, where you got a movie and and one meal. That didn't work like that. You got on a boat, right? Yeah, because right. Yeah, because my son wasn't flying the route that day, So it just it didn't work. So you got on a boat, and it was a local, which means it stopped in a port. And if it stopped in a port, it wasn't an hour and a half of refueling. It was get off for a year. And most people never went back to the boat. And those who did, so they made it to the next port, in Athens, in Greece. The next one's in the Saloniki Islands. Next one, this port of Turkey. One of the ports was Antalya, where an El Al flight yesterday made an emergency landing, not because of mechanical, because a woman was critically ill, and doctors on board said she's got to get to the hospital. They put the plane down, sent her to the hospital, and then the Turks, Yamach Shemam, didn't want to let them refuel. So they had to go fly to Rhodes to pick up some gas, cheap gas in Rhodes, and fly it into Israel. That was the flight that came back from Warsaw to Israel. It took a long flight. That was a local. That was really a local. But so those got off in Antalya and other port cities in Turkey, and a meager few make it to Akko, to Eretz Yisrael. One of the most famous who makes it to Akko is Rabbi Yosef Karo, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, and he gets to Tzfat, and he joins the whole Chabura of the Kabbalists in Tzfat of that day. But there's a minority that make it to Eretz Yisrael. But that's when Italian Jewry becomes Sfaradi, and very heavily Sfaradi. Fine. So you have Sfaradi Shul. If you go to a Sfaradi Shul, you will notice that there is no quote-unquote Chazan or Shliach Tzibur for Psukei de Zimra. Everybody's saying it on his own or her own, and there's one man sitting and just saying it out loud. Just saying it out loud. He's called a pace setter. That's all. Just give him the pace so that everybody should get the idea where the Chazan is going to start when the Psukei de Zimra is actually finished. And the Chazan is going to start with Kaddish. In Kaddish and the Baruch Hu. And it's interesting, I'll mention this now too, because I just hit this subject, just tangentially really, and that is the Kaddish that we say after Psukei de Zimra, before Baruch Hu. Is that a Kaddish that culminates the Psukei de Zimra, or is that a Kaddish that's going on preparation for davening? What is it? What role is the Kaddish playing? So the answer is, as all my students in Chashmonaim know, machloket. Come on, you know the answer. It's a machloket, right? So it's a machloket between Rabbi Yosef Karo and the Ramah. So Rabbi Yosef Karo, the Sfaradi, says it goes on what's coming up, And that would be true for the Kaddish between Ashrei and Shmon Esrei by Mincha. The Kaddish is for the Shmon Esrei. For Ma'ariv, the Kaddish after Birkat Hashkivenu, Shomer Moisho La'ad, Chazan says Kaddish, it's for the Shmon Esrei. And Musaf on Shabbat, Chazan says Kaddish, and so on. In the morning, we don't have a Kaddish right before davening, and that's because of Smichut Geula L'Tfilah, the very important notion of connecting the bracha Baruch Atah Hashem Ga'al Yisrael with the first words of Shmon Esrei. And there's no toleration of any interruption whatsoever, a hefsek. There's even a discussion in Shulchan Aruch between Rabbi Yosef Karo and the Ramah whether we should say Amen. I hear the Chazan say Baruch Atah Hashem Ga'al Yisrael. Should I say Amen or not? Rabbi Yosef Karo says no, because it's a hefsek. That's already an interruption. Ramah says no, you can say Amen and go on. So what do? We try to end our Baruch Atah Hashem Ga'al Yisrael with the Chazan, and when two people conclude a bracha simultaneously, neither answers Amen to each other. If I hear two people say Borei Priya Eitz on an apple, I don't answer Amen. If I myself made the bracha and he made the bracha and was ending it at the same time, there's no answer of Amen. So that's how the Chazanim got used to, and the Kahal ending Gal Yisrael together. So, but what happens is that if everybody is saying it loud, or even singing it like on Shabbat, and so on, so you don't even hear the Chazan. So people thought erroneously, why don't I hear the Chazan? He must be saying the end low. So Chazanim started going, and you don't hear the end. That is categorically a minhag ta'ut. That is a mistake, and ought to be corrected. Many Gedolei Yisrael said it was a mistake, and has to be corrected. The Chazan has to say everything out loud. So not the Gal Yisrael. Why does it sound like you don't hear him? Because whoever took a hearing test once upon a time in their lives. You ever take a hearing test? Yeah, I hear about it all the time because that's what my wife did 30 years for a living. And I have a daughter who does it for a living also. So we do a hearing test. So first they give you a pure tone, right? They give you the earphones. You're in a soundproof booth, and you have to. Do you hear it? Raise your hand. Don't hear it. Don't raise your hand. Fine. Okay. So then they give you with static in the earphone, and they give you the same test. That's called reka. You have to have in the background. You have to have, and then they measure your hearing, because real life situations is not a soundproof booth. You have buses outside and cars honking and people talking and so on. There's ra'ash, so they put ra'ash, they put noise in the earphones, first in the right ear and the left ear, and they test your hearing. How you can do with ra'ash. And obviously, with the background of ra'ash, of noise, you hear worse because it's being interrupted. You can't hear it. And that's what happens when the Chazan and everybody says or sings Tzur Yisrael Kuma V'Eretz Yisrael together. It's ra'ash. So that you don't hear the Chazan say Baruch Atah Hashem Gal Yisrael, but he should be saying it. But that's why there's no Kaddish there, because that's a hefsek, that's an interruption. So we simply move the Kaddish back to before Baruch Hu. So according to Rabbi Yosef Karo, the Kaddish before Baruch Hu in Shacharit is the Kaddish before Shmon Esrei, except it took a few steps back because you can't have a hefsek of Gal Yisrael. But Rabbi Yosef Ramah Yisrael says, no, that Kaddish before Baruch Hu is actually the Kaddish for Psukim Zimra. Because when we say Psukim of Tehillim, we also say a Kaddish. So even if let's assume we're going to sit here and stand here and say Tillim for the boys and everybody and so on, the Chatufim. So if there's a minyan here, there's reason you can say a Kaddish. Somebody wants to say a Kaddish, there's reason to say a Kaddish. Fine. You don't have to, but you can say a Kaddish. The saying of Torah Shebechtav brings out a Kaddish. For example, after laning, after Kriyat Torah. Whether it's Shabbat, weekday, Rosh Chodesh, no matter when, there's Kaddish at the end of the last Aliyah. So let's say on Shabbat, the last Aliyah is Shvi. That's when the Chazan, or Bal Koirei is a Chazan for this purpose, says Kaddish. Well, 1 second, there's also Maftir. Yeah, so Maftir is not really an official Aliyah, and the proof of the pudding is that we reread the Psukim that we just read. And why is it so? Because there were people, can you imagine Jews got insulted that they were only invited to say a Haftarah of Yeshayahu or Yehoshua last Shabbat or Yirmiyahu and Yecheskel or Amos or Hosea. I mean, they get 7 aliyahs of Torah's Moshe, and I only get from the Nevi'im. Imagine if people got insulted if they got a Haftarah. So the pitzui, the consolation prize was, all right, you know what? We'll reread the last 3 psukim. You can say a baruch hu and say a bracha. Fine. That's all it was, just to calm the guy down in case he was exploding from anger that the Gabbai gave him the wrong aliyah. That's why a person under bar mitzvah can get mafter, because mafter is not a bona fide aliyah. And the proof is, there's no kaddish afterwards. The kaddish was already after the shvi. And when there are 2 sifrei Torah, like this coming Shabbat, so the minhag is you don't give a katan, you don't give somebody under bar mitzvah. And by the Sfardim, they say Kaddish a second time after the reading of the Rosh Chodesh laning the Shabbos. And what do the Ashkenazim do? We have what's called a Yiddish cup, a Jewish head. We put the second Sefer Torah on the table with the first Sefer Torah as the Baal Koreh says Kaddish, and he has in mind for the second reading, even though he didn't read it yet. It's a gimmick. That's what we do. That's why we put the Sefer Torah on the that the Rav explained. Yeah, Faksha. Yeah. Why did they say it's for Psukkot? Why did they delay it? Because it's a summation of it's after you're saying the Psukkot Zimra, then after you say Psukim, after you study Torah Shebechtav, you express that all this was L'Shem Shamayim and so on. Yesh Me Rabbam Vrach, that Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to be known universally. You're saying as follows: I accept it, but that's not good enough. I have a mission of Avraham Avinu to spread the good word outward. So it's a declaration of intent to spread the word outward. So it's after. And that's why there's a Kaddish after the reading of Torah Shebechtav. Now, let's say Mincha and Shabbat, where there is no Kaddish after the laning, and that's simply because we're going to put back the Sifrei Torah, and there are psukim that are said, right? David Mismol Hashem Uvnucho Yomar, and then the Chazan says Kaddish. According to the Ramah, the Chazan saying Kaddish on Mincha and Shabbat is for the laning, essentially, not in preparation of Shmoneh Esrei. And so too on Shabbat laning, that after, so we said a Kaddish, but then there are more psukim. We say Mizmor David, Havul Hashem B'nei Elim, and so on, and we say V'nucho Yomar. So there's Kaddish, and that's for that purpose, according to the Ramah. But our Rebbe, the Rav, said that even though in Kol HaKavod to the Rav, to Ramah, we actually look at it that the Kaddish goes for something that's coming up, not for something that just was. And not only do Rabbanim give their drasha before the Kaddish by Musaf, right? If a rabbi is going to speak in Shul on Shabbat, when is he usually going to do it? They put back the Sefer Torah, and then the rabbi gets up to speak. And then the Shlich Tzibur for Musaf starts. Yid Kadel, Vid Kadel, right? It starts with Musaf, and so on. There are some Rabbanim who decided, for a variety of reasons, not to speak at that juncture, but to speak after Musaf before Inkel Akenu. Besides that, that's each rabbi does what he wants. But most shuls in the world, if the rabbi is going to give a drasha, it's going to be before Musaf, where he's got the crowd there. Everybody's there. And it's before Kaddish. Nobody's going to have Kaddish and all of a sudden everybody sits down. For sure not. And the Rav gave an interesting proof that the Kaddish goes on the Musaf. He says in the Nigun, what we call the Nusach, if it's going to be this coming Shabbat, there's Rosh Chodesh. So on Shabbat, for Musaf, the Chazan is going to start Kaddish like a regular Shabbos. When he gets to the end of the Kaddish, he's going to go, Damiran de Alma, and he goes into the Nigun of the Yom Tov mode for the Musaf, which is going to be the Musaf of Rosh Chodesh, Shabbos Rosh Chodesh in this case. And if it's Tal and Geshem, the Kaddish is going to have the Nigun of the Tal and Geshem. If it's Nila, the Kaddish is going to have the Nigun of the Nila. And what's interesting was the Rav himself, and this is not Rechilas, he himself said that he wasn't blessed with musical talents, even though he was a Levi, and he was right. He wasn't. But he happened to have been a darn good Balkaire. That's interesting in itself. But he wasn't musically inclined, but he had this little insight that's musical to make a proof on a halachic point where the Kaddish belongs to, before or after. And he said, therefore, it impacts. So all of you are invited to shul this coming Sunday morning on Rosh Chodesh. We know that the men take off their tefillin before Musaf on Rosh Chodesh. When exactly do we take off the tefillin before Musaf? Before the Kaddish or after the Kaddish? And the Rav said that's the machloket between the Ramah and the Rabbi Yosef Karo. If you say that the Kaddish goes on the Musaf, then you ought to have the tefillin off already before the Chazan says the Kaddish. And that's how they did it in the Maimonides school in Boston. But if you say, like most of OUisrael, that the Kaddish is on the psukim that go before, so the Chazan is going to say the Kaddish, and then there's a break. And everybody, we can see gobbling very quickly, winding up their tefillin, and then somebody gives a clap that we're all starting Shemona Esrei together. That's how it works. So notice the position of when you take off the tefillin Rosh Chodesh is directly determined by this dispute, this machloket, whether the Kaddish goes for that which we just said or that which is going to say. Okay, so let's get back to Psukkah de Zimra. So Psukkah de Zimra are psukim that are said, chapters of Tehillim that are said before we even get to the part of davening. So I said again, in the Sephardi shul, there's no shliach tzibur for Psukkah de Zimra. In the Ashkenazi shul, so there is a quasi shliach tzibur, but he's not being mitzi anybody anything. It's just that he's also a pace setter, nothing more than that. And that's why you can have somebody under bar mitzvah be the quote-unquote chazan for Psukkah de Zimra. You don't need a minyan for Psukkah de Zimra either. If there's going to be a kaddish in the section even before that, when we say the korbanot, so there's an option to say a kaddish to Rabbanon, and in Nusach Ashkenaz there's an option to say a kaddish after Mizbah Shech Chanukah Tabayit LeDavid. So then obviously you need a minyan. But let's assume we have a shul that in its weekday minyan, they're just getting their 10th person. Usually if they have a shul that needs the 10th person, it happens after they already started Psukkah de Zimra. So fine, you can say Psukkah de Zimra until you get to after Yishtabach. Yishtabach is going to be, you want a minyan there, so you can say Kaddish. Fine. So you don't need even a minyan for it. Now let's look at source number one. Source number one, the Gemara tells us, Masechet Shabbat, Amar Rabbi Yossi says, Yehei chelki migomrei Hallel b'chol yom. My fortune should be, my portion should be, as if to say, I wish I was part of those who complete Hallel every single day. Complete Hallel every single day? Who completes Hallel every single day? So I'll just jump to a comment of my father, Elisheva, who used to say, that with regard to Hallel on Yom HaTzmaut, he says, the issue isn't whether we have to be saying Hallel on Yom HaTzmaut. The issue is that with this state that we have today, perhaps we should be saying Hallel every day, that we got up in the morning and it's still here. So okay, but that was said that was a non-halachic statement. That just expressed his overt religious Zionism and so on. But Rabbi Yossi in the Gemara is saying, oh, halavai, I wish my portion would be with those who complete the Hallel every day. So the Gemara says, Eini, that's not so. How can that be? Let me just say something philological. The Talmud Bavli will use this word, Aleph Yud Nun Yud, Eini. It's a contraction of two words, Ein, he. The two words are grouped together, where the Bavli says Eini, and we know from as seventh graders, the Rebbe would translate it. Eini, it's not so. So what does that mean? Eini, it's Ein, he. It is not so. That's what it means. And the parallel in the Yerushalmi is Kaini, Kaf Yud Nun Yud, which is Kain he, and it's read with a question mark. Is that so? Kaini. So sometimes you have the assimilation of syllables with words like Ravina. There's Ravina and Rav Ashi. Ravina is Rabbeinu Avina. His name wasn't Ravina. His name was Avina. But Ravina is Rabbeinu Avina. So this happens sometimes, especially in the copying. They try to save some room and squeeze letters and so on. So Rabbeinu Avina became Ravina. Okay, so yeah. Is referring to, it's not so. This comment that it's referring to the notion that it's a wonderful thing to complete Hallel every day. The notion. Because in Aramaic, the he, the who, they were Galicianos. It's like, who's the first Galicianos? Clearly, Yirmiyahu. He said, Rafa'eni Hashem ve'erafeh. Right? So he said it like a Galiciana. Rafa'enu. Right? So, Eini, it's not the case. V'amar mar. Who's mar? Mar means sir. V'amar mar. That usually means that somebody is being quoted, and we don't always know who was being quoted, or it's so obvious that everybody knows about it. This particular case, we don't know who is the author of the following, but it's good enough. It's good enough. Today, if somebody gives a drasha or shir, and he wants to say something with some authority, and he doesn't have a clue where it is, he says, it's in the Svarim Kedoshim, or in Yiddish, in the Heilige Svarim. When I hear somebody say in the Heilige Svarim, I know he doesn't know what he's talking about. I know it. Because if he knew what he was talking about or where it came from, he would have said so. That's all. You can say, I saw somewhere, I don't remember where. I think that's legitimate. But to pull it off and say, I heard in the Sfarim Kedoshim, that means he doesn't know anything. So, V'hamar Mar, so there's a quote, Hakorei Hallel b'chol yom, anybody that reads Hallel daily, Hareze mecharefu magadef. Mecharefu magadef means it's, to use the word cursing, blasphemy. It's blasphemy, that's the word, thank you. Blasphemy, where there's an Aveira in the Torah called Birkat Hashem. Birkat Hashem doesn't mean blessing God, it's euphemistic. It's just the opposite, but we don't even want to use the word with regard to Kadosh Baruch Hu, so we call it Birkat Hashem. So there's an Aveira in the Torah to be blasphemous against the name of God. So here it says, Hareze mecharefu magadef. So the Gemara says, so Gemara has to resolve this. Well, let's get it right. Is it a good thing or bad thing to say Hallel every single day? So Gemara says, Ki kamrinan, you know what Rabbi Yossi was talking about when he said, I wish my portion would be with those who complete the Hallel every day? B'psukei Zimra. He was talking about Psukei Zimra. He wasn't talking about Hallel that we say on Yom Tov, where, as we'll see soon, or maybe next week, there are 18 specific days that we say Hallel. In Chutz La'aretz, it's 21 days because of Yom Tov Sheni. And then we add on as a custom, Rosh Chodesh. We'll see that it's only a custom, it's not a din, Rosh Chodesh. And the last 6 days of Pesach is also. And the absolute unequivocal clue is whenever we say Hallel abbreviated, we call Chatzi Hallel, that means it's only a custom to say Hallel. When we have all the sections of Hallel, that's the mitzvah of saying Hallel. The word Chatzi Hallel is ambiguous. We say about 90% of Hallel on Rosh Chodesh. So the word Chetzi doesn't mean 50%. It's like Chatzi Shiur. When somebody says Chatzi Shiur, he means he ate less than the full measure of matzah. So he ate Chatzi Shiur. It doesn't mean he ate 50% of the Shiur. So Chatzi is less than the whole. Or Chatzi Kaddish. Nobody ever measured the words that it's on the 50-yard line before you say Yesh Lama Rabbah. It's less than the complete. So we have Kaddish Shalem, the complete Kaddish, and then we have partial Kaddish. So the word Chetzi here means partial. So partial could mean 1% to 99%. That's partial. If it's not 100%, it's Chetzi. So we have here Chatzi Hallel on Rosh Chodesh, this coming Shabbat and Sunday. So it says, what's the deal? What exactly is the Gemara answering? That Rabbi Yossi said what he said about Psukei Zimra. He says, Halavai, that I should be part of those who complete Psukei Zimra on a daily basis, but he said nothing about Hallel on the Yomim Tovim. That's not what he was talking about. When the Gemara says, whoever says Hallel daily, it's blasphemous. So that the Gemara says, that's something else. That's the real Hallel. And the question is, what's so blasphemous about saying Hallel? I mean, it's Tillim, Kuf Yud Gimel, Kuf Yud Dalet, Kuf Tet Vav, Kuf Tet Zayin, Kuf Yud Zayin, Kuf Yud Chet. From Hallelujah, Alu Avdei Hashem, until Hodul Hashem, Kitov Kulam Chazdo. What's wrong with saying this on a daily basis? So the answer is that if Chazal instituted Hallel for special moments, to commemorate special moments in Jewish history, the saying of Hallel on a daily basis cheapens the special moment. You can't have a special moment if every single day you're doing the same thing. I'll give you a few good examples of this. One is Birkat HaGomel. Birkat HaGomel. Who is supposed to say Birkat HaGomel? So the Gemara tells us there are 4 scenarios that you say Birkat HaGomel, and they're all based on, by the way, the Baruch Nafshi that we say on Rosh Chodesh, Baruch Nafshi et Hashem. So you have 4 scenarios, and I'm sorry, not that Baruch Nafshi. It's from Tillim Kuf Zayin, from Hodul Hashem, Yomru Gulei Hashem. Yomru Gulei Hashem Mashatzar. You have there 4 scenarios of Yomru Gulei Hashem, and one is if you traveled the desert and you made it, if you traveled the high seas and you made it, if you were sick and you recovered, and if you were a prisoner and you were let out. So clearly, anybody who was a chatuf in Gaza and got out has to say goimel. That's no question. But if you went to jail for 30 days for drunken driving, and then you came out of jail and you bench goimel, I'm telling you with full authority, it's a bracha levatala. It's a bracha levatala. Chazal weren't talking about that. Lehefech, they should have kept you in for another month. It's if you were in for drunken driving. No, it's the Chazal were talking about the Roman dungeons, where in all likelihood you never came out alive. So if you came out alive, you better thank a Kadosh Baruch Hu. And the Rav said that all 4 scenarios were life-threatening situations. And a boat that made it from Spain to Eretz Yisrael, that was a nes. That it didn't turn capsize in a high storm. It wasn't overtaken by pirates. There were all kinds of good reasons why a person may not make it. And so much so that in the 13th century, one of the Ba'alei HaTosafot suggests, sitting in Paris, that today, in our day, Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael is not mandatory because it's dangerous. And you want to know something? In the 13th century, it was dangerous. You don't have to jeopardize your life to move to Eretz Yisrael. And somebody in the 21st century is going to pull out that Tosfot and say, that's why I'm not going on Aliyah. It's a busha v'cherpa, okay? Because as we all know, it is 4,000 times safer to fly a plane than to get into a car. 4,000 times, statistically speaking. Notice the idea of going into a car, going on the plane, not coming out alive, you have got a 4,000 times chance better coming out of the plane than coming out of a car dead or hurt or something like that. So you can't say that's a problem. That's why there's a big machloket amongst the poskim about benching goimel after airline flights where everything is okay. And that was the Rav's opinion. And he flew every week from New York to Boston, back and forth. He did not bench goimel. And he urged us also, he explained that you can't use goimel for something that's regular. So my sister lives in Chashmonaim, and there you had a lot of people who would fly back on Mondays and come back on Friday to Israel because they worked in high tech. And there was like 20, 30 people lining up every Shabbos by Shvi to say goimel. My sister called it the Moadon HaGomel HaMatmid. It was the club, the goimel club. And the rabbi put an end to it. He said one guy will bench goimel for everybody. And I told my sister, tell all of them they don't have to bench goimel. But all right, listen, they feel they want to bench goimel. Now, if the flight was okay, if both engines flame out, that means stop working in the middle, and you land safely, you better bench goimel. If you were on the flight that landed in the Hudson River in 2009, Sully, if you didn't see the movie, go see it. It's a nice movie. So to see what happens when birds hit the engines and both engines flame out, and then he made this miraculous landing. Even my son said he was a great pilot. Sully was a great pilot. They were able to put it down on the Hudson River, right? I remember the Jerusalem Post. I saw the picture before it was a movie. I saw the picture of it on the first page of the Post. That was something. Those people had a bench goimel. Every single person came out alive. Every single person. That was a nes min hashamayim. Literally min hashamayim. Literally. It was min hashamayim and v'mayim al. It was unbelievable. So these things, if you say goimel on a regular basis, it loses ta'am v'reach. It loses its flavor, its uniqueness. It's there for the special moments. If you would be in the days of Beit HaMikdash, would you rush to Beit HaMikdash to offer a korban todah every Monday and Thursday? No, you wouldn't do it, because that was like a special occasion. So childbirth, so women bench goimel after childbirth, many times at the brit, because the mother's there, and if it's a girl, so they'll do it when she comes to shul, whatever. So there's also, and my daughter says, who delivers babies, Baruch Hashem, says that it's no less miraculous today than it was in the days of Moshe Rabbeinu. It's miraculous, because thank God we are on top of the situation with a lot of monitoring and so on during the birth process, that if something who goes wrong, we can intervene and we can do things, and we've saved enormous amount of babies because of Kadosh Baruch Hu gave us the wisdom and to do these things. That doesn't mean that the process is any less life-threatening. So it's life-threatening. So you have to. It's worth goimel. The Rav said anytime you go on operation with full anesthesia, you have to bench goimel, because he said full anesthesia in itself is life-threatening. There are people who don't wake up from it. So it's a life, irrespective if it's a routine operation. Say, the doctor does 5 a day, 10 a day. What's the difference? If it's full anesthesia. So there are the Rav had certain objective things to say goimel, but not every day, not for every little thing. And that's the problem. If you say Hallel for every single day, we have a notion of thanking Kadosh Baruch Hu for the daily. We say it Maidim. ועל ניסיך שבכל יום עמנו, ועל נפלאותיך וטובותיך שבכל עת ערב ובוקר וצהריים. We thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for, that we're breathing. I had a man in shul, מה שלומך? אני נושם, I'm breathing. Okay, בסדר, it wasn't funny at 93 years old. It wasn't funny. He kept saying, I'm breathing, okay, בסדר. I actually went to see a person just last week who was over 100 years old, and I called him up on a particular day last week, and I asked him if I could come visit. He said, come in 2 days, but call in the morning to see if I'm still here. I mean, people live that day to day. He has a tremendous sense of humor, absolutely tremendous sense of humor. I mean, that's the story of the 95-year-old man who went into the bank, and the Kidah says, if you close your money up for 5 years, you'll get such and such. He says, Maidallah, I don't even buy green bananas. I mean, the idea that you don't know what's going to be at the next minute, and sometimes, and I remind people before Yom Kippur, it's a sober thought, that people think that Yom Kippur, is for people, who are sitting in Beit Avot. It's not true. It's for everybody. It's for everybody. You don't know what's going to be tomorrow. You don't know what's going to be the next day. We make plans, and everything is on condition that we're still around tomorrow. And it's not a simple matter at all to live with that idea. And Kadosh Baruch Hu has jolted us into that position. So let's try to understand what is the fundamental difference between the Psukei de Zimra that we say every morning and we're lauded to do so, and Hallel that we say periodically, and if you do it on a daily basis, it's frowned upon. What is the basic difference? So to this end, the Rav developed the whole idea, surrounded by what's on the title, Psukei de Zimra and Pirkei Hallel. Now, 1 second. Hallel is not only prakim, chapters, but it's also, what is a perek? A series of psukim. And what are Psukei de Zimra? A series of verses that add up to prakim, chapters. So both the Psukei de Zimra have psukim and prakim, and Hallel has psukim and prakim. So why do we call it Psukei de Zimra? What do you mean we? The Gemara said it in source 1, the last 2 words, B'Psukei de Zimra. Why do Chazal call it Psukei de Zimra? And why do Chazal call the saying of Hallel Pirkei Hallel, the chapters of Hallel? And the Rav said we have to understand the fundamental difference between reading verses and reading chapters. All right, so now you know the answer? Oh, no, I thought the share was over. So here comes the idea. For starters, reading psukim. What is the minimal quantitative value, to use the halachic expression, a shear? What is the minimum quantitative value of Torah study of the written law, of Torah Shebechtav, which is Tanakh, Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim? How much do you have to read in order that you're going to get a V, a check in your book, that you did fill them as correct? How do you know that, Rivka? Because the Malach taught it to you. How many times? Now you remember it. No. Oh, see? No. He gave you the bump also. The answer is a pasuk. Correct. So Rabbi Safran says it's the minimum of Kriyat Torah is a pasuk. So therefore, if you have 3 psukim as a minimal Torah reading, the Baal Koreh has to mark it as 3 psukim. Now, I've had situations where the Baal Koreh is a little bit sloppy on what's called a trup. And somehow he has what I call run-on sentences. He doesn't have a sof pasuk where it should be a sof pasuk, and it just runs into the next pasuk. I would correct him on that. When I stood next to the Baal Koreh on Shabbat, Baal Koreh I bring him to a stop, repeat the last phrase, El Moshe Lemor. Just bring it to a stop, because there has to be 3 stops, minimal, in order to constitute an aliyah. So of course, if the aliyah has 45 psukim and he did it once, I wouldn't make a big deal about that, because you have your requisite 3 psukim. But you have to have 3 psukim. But one of the proofs of a minimum is the Gemara that says, with regard to education of our little toddlers, children, of Torah, where do you start? So there's one opinion that says you start with Torah tziva lanu Moshe morasha kilat Yaakov. The whole pasuk, until the kid can say the whole pasuk, you've done nothing. So what's the difference? Teach him the word Torah. Okay, you can teach him the word Torah. The idea was the first word that should come out of his mouth is Torah. I don't know. My daughter, who's big Talmid Chacham, first word that came out of her mouth was banana. You know, But Torah tziva lanu Moshe, Morasha kilat Yaakov, and then the Gemara gives another example, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Both of the examples are full psukim. What really, the Gemara is teaching us many, many different things. The Rav's grandfather, Reb Chaim Brisk, said that when it comes to chinuch, education, the child, while not obligated in doing the mitzvah, has to be educated to perform the mitzvah in a way that if an adult performed it that way, he or she would fulfill the obligation. Good example. You take an etrog. Now, there are different disqualifications for an etrog. So sometimes you'll see at the duchan where they're selling the etrogim, they'll say, here, 5 shekel for kids. They're all psulim. They're disqualified. So I once told the guy, if they're disqualified, it's disqualified for a kid also. Why? He's not obligated. Yeah, but if the father buys him an etrog, for chinuch, the object of the mitzvah has to be kosher. You can't say that if an adult would take that etrog and say a bracha, it would be a bracha in vain, a bracha levatala, then you can't use that object for educating a child. You don't have to buy an etrog for 1,000 shekel for a 4-year-old. You don't have to do that. But if you're going to give a 4-year-old an etrog, it has to be minimally kasher, that if an adult took it, he would be fulfilling his obligation. That is a very, very important notion. And therefore, the Gemara says that when you start teaching a child Torah, the minimal is a full pasuk. Because if he's going to say less than a full pasuk, that's not Torah yet. There's no Avera to teach a kid half a pasuk. No Avera there. But you're not in fulfillment of chinuch until the kid is able to say a pasuk, because that is considered a bona fide section of Torah shebichtav. So there are a handful of psukim that only have 3 words. There's no such thing as a pasuk with 2 words. There's psukim with 3 words. Yivrecha Hashem v'yishmerecha. Right? So, Vayeshev Yitzchak Bigrar. A handful of psukim that come with 3 words only, and it's a bona fide pasuk. Now here, the Vilna Gaon was a stickler that when we read the Aseret HaDibrot on Parshat Yitro or Parshat Ve'etchanan or Chag HaShavuot, we read it 3 times, there are 2 different traditions as to the nigun, the trop of the reading of the Aseret HaDibrot. One is called the Tam Elyon, the upper notes, and one is called the Tam Tachton, the lower notes. And the reason why it's called upper and lower is simply, those who are familiar with Kriyat HaTorah, the signs of the upper ones are more often on top of the letters. A pazer, tlisha katana, kadma va'azla. So these are signs that are on top. And if you read the Tam Tachton, there's a lot of mercha, tipcha, mercha, etnachta, mercha, tipcha, sof pasuk. Those signs are printed under the letters of the Torah. So one is called the upper, you may call it the upper case, and the lower case trop that we have. Now, in many shuls, what's the difference? Is it just in the music? No. The Tam Tachton divides the Aseret HaDibrot into psukim. And if not mistaken, there are 13 psukim of the Aseret HaDibrot. 10 commandments come in 13 psukim. Zachot Yom Shabbat HaKacho is the end of a pasuk. But you're not in the end of Shabbat. There's still more to say. Sheshit Yomim Tavot. But it's the end of a pasuk. Or Lo Tirtzach, Lo Tinaf, Lo Tignov. It's all one pasuk. But that's already 3 Dibrot. So the Tam Tachton breaks it up into verses, and you get up to 13. And the Tam Elyon divides it into Dibrot. Dibrot. So there, if the Baal Koreh is reading it in a Tam Elyon, it's going to be Lo Tirtzach, Lo Tinaf, Lo Tignov. So that's like a pasuk of 2 words, but that's not an official pasuk, because the Tam Tachton gives it the pasuk, and there's no such thing as a pasuk of 2 words. And the Vilna Gaon said that it should always be read in the Tam Tachton. Why? Because he said Kriyat Torah has to conform with the rules of Kol Pasuk de Lo Pascha Moshe Anan Lo Paskinan. Every pasuk that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't put the period at the end of the sentence, we don't do it. It has to be done properly. So, okay, the Vilna Gaon said his word. It's not the only time in town where the Vilna Gaon said what he said, and OUisrael does it differently. So there are different minhagim. There are shuls that the Baal Koreh will read the Tam Elyon all 3 times against the Vilna Gaon entirely. And there are some shuls that will read the Tam Tachton for Kriyat Torah of Yitro and Bet Hanan, but on Shavuot, they'll read the Tam Elyon. They'll divide it into Dibrot, because it's a reenactment of Ma'amad Har Sinai, so you want to hear the 10 commandments, and it should be divided as such. Again, everybody does like their minhag, every shul has their minhag, and we're not here to challenge any of There's legitimacy in all of the minhagim. But at least we understand where the Vilna Gaon was coming from, why he objected to reading it in the Tam Elyon. So you have the concept of Torah shebichtav, it's minimal, has to be a full pasuk. In the oral law, Torah shebal peh, what's the minimal shi'ur, quantitative measure, to fulfill the mitzvah? This is going to be a tough one, because the texts don't have sanctity in terms of grammar. You're not going to say one Mishnah. You're not going to say one what would constitute one word, me'ematai, first word of Shas. It has to be one idea. You have to have something that's tangible. Me'ematai korin et Shema b'arvit. From when do we read the Shema at night? That's a tangible idea. I don't have the answer yet, but at least I know there's a subject matter. There's a mitzvah of Shema. There's a time framework called nighttime. And I'm asking the question, what time is considered the beginning of night? All that is packed into one phrase, Me'ematai korin et Shema b'arvit. But if I just say Me'ematai or Me'ematai korin, I still don't know anything. Or Me'ematai korin Shema, I still don't know everything. I don't know. What do you mean, when do you read Shema? What's the story? When, what? So there has to be some basic understanding. And this I say, dafke to people who daven Nusach Ashkenaz Friday night and say Bameh Madlikin before, after Kabbalat Shabbat, before Ma'ariv. Bameh Madlikin is a full chapter of Mishnah of Masechet Shabbat. I can tell you there are plenty of people out there in the world who babble up Bameh Madlikin and they don't have a clue what they're saying. So they should skip it. It's like, it's chaval. And even worse is those who daven Nusach Sfard and say a section of the Zohar of Kigavna Dinun Mityachadin, Raza de Shabbat, the secret of Shabbat, and don't have a clue what they're saying. I think less people have a clue what they're saying in Kigavna than they have in Bameh Madlikin. So at least in Bameh Madlikin, you get the idea that we're talking about the mitzvah of candlelights. So you're talking about which oils, which wicks. Okay, besada, So here in Israel, that's not an issue. Everybody understands Bameh Madlikin. But Chutz La'aretz, the people who don't understand Hebrew, and for them, the Siddur is nothing more than Italian opera, and they're just reading it in a language like I can sing Ricandito Monio. So what? So I can sing a piece of Italian opera. I don't understand one bloody word from what I'm saying there. And there were Chazanim in America who did Kol Nidre. They had no idea what they were saying. They were, unfortunately. So Chutz La'aretz is more of a problem. But Torah Shebal Peh, you have to have some basic understanding of the text. Basic understanding of the text, the ABC of the text, in order to get some type of a mitzvah out of it. But in Torah shebichtav, you don't have to have even a basic understanding of the text. All you have to do is be able to, like a parrot, read it. That's all. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, without any understanding whatsoever, you get a mitzvah. You get a mitzvah. So the Rav tried to understand, why do you get a mitzvah? I understand that in the oral law, in Torah Shebal Peh, if I don't have a basic understanding, I get nothing. Nobody's being asked to understand it like the Vilna Gaon understood it. But if you don't understand what you're saying, you don't even understand the topic, it's a waste of time. But in Torah shebichtav, I'm going to read Tillim. Tillim is Torah shebichtav. Why am I reading Tillim? It's an emergency situation. People said, read Tillim. Which chapters? These chapters. And I started reading. I read every word perfectly. What did I say? I don't have a clue. Is there a value to it? Yes. Reading Torah shebichtav, there's value even without basic understanding. And the Rabbi asked the question, why? He said the answer is that every time we read the written law, Torah shebichtav, two things happen at the same time. One is that we're understanding Torah on some level, fine. And that you're not going to have if you don't understand it. But there's a second level, and that is thanking HaKadosh Baruch Hu for simply giving us the Torah. That's all. We're thanking HaKadosh Baruch Hu that we have the Torah, even if we don't understand it. We're thankful that we have the Torah. And the Rav explained, that's why at the Aliyah Torah, there are two brachot. The first is for learning. We say every morning as part of Birkot HaShachar, as part of Birkot HaTorah. So that's the mitzvah for Torah study. After V'tzivanu lasok b'divrei Torah. But what is Asher Natan Lanu Torat Emet B'chayei Olam B'tochenu, which you say after the Torah reading? Where do you have a bracha after the mitzvah? So the answer is, it's Hallel, it's a Shebach, it's a song to God that He actually gave us the Torah. And on that level, we fulfill some type of level of Shira and Hallel by simply reading the Torah Shebichtav. And that's why there is some value in reading Psukei de Zimra, even if you don't understand it. Even if you don't understand it. We know that these are words of praise to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, whether we got it or not, makes no difference. Now, if you understand it, it's even better. Don't get me wrong. But if you don't understand it, it also should be said. And now comes another point. The Hebrew verb kuf reish aleph, kara, korei, to read. When the Mishnah uses the word kri'ah, korei, in any variation, it doesn't mean reading in a colloquial sense. I'm reading a newspaper. It doesn't mean that. It means the use of biblical texts or other texts for liturgical purposes, for purposes of tefillah. In other words, the idea that our Chazal taught us which texts we are using, that becomes rather exclusive. And let's assume you have the Prakim of Tehillim for Psukei de Zimra, and you decide, you know what? I want to put in a few other things because I like them. It really shouldn't be done. There's something about what Chazal said here, this is what's mandated, and so on. But if you have outside books that you thought, this would really be very, very nice. I'll give an example. So our Rabbi Lichtenstein Zatzal, the Rav son-in-law, the great Rosh Yeshiva of Lunchwood, so he was well versed in general literature. I mean, he had a PhD in English literature from Harvard. And when he came in Aliyah in 1972, 1971, the Israelis didn't know who he was. What is this? A Rosh Yeshiva, clean-shaven, PhD in English literature from Harvard. I mean, we had a hard time in YU with him, because in YU, Rav Ahron, who was the head of the Kollel and everything, you had to have a Gemara, a Rambam, and a Webster's Dictionary to hear the shir, and not necessarily in that order, because he was using words that none of us, certainly not in Brooklyn, New York, but I mean, even in normal places, they never heard these words. So he was unbelievable. But more than his English, but even when he came to Israel, his Hebrew was highfalutin Hebrew, he would quote from all over the place in a shir, in a sikha. And I remember when I was in Yeshiva in 72, so he quoted from John Milton's Paradise Lost. So one of the Israelis didn't catch who he quoted, and he tapped me on the shoulder. He says, he's from the Rishonim or the Achronim? This is a real story that happened in the Gush. So from then on, we call John Milton, Rabbeinu Milton, Right, so to Rav Ahron Lichtenstein, I always said, if he read Shakespeare, he had to say Birchas HaTorah, because he was always bringing everything in. I mean, we learned the Ramban, and all of a sudden we're hearing about St. Augustine. It's to understand. What Rav Ahron was doing was to give us to understand exactly what the Ramban had in mind in a theological point against the background of others. So sometimes when you see other positions, then it crystallizes what the Ramban actually had in mind. And that's why he was doing it. It wasn't because he was showing off his knowledge. And the Rav too, when you read his article, Ish Halacha, Halachic Man, and Lonely Man of Faith, and so on, all of a sudden you're seeing all these philosophers, he's quoting left and right, and scientists, and this, and Kant, and Beseda. That's done. So we should understand maybe a Rambam. You understand what the Rambam had in mind? Or Ramban, for that matter? So that's why they were doing it. So that's fair game. Sometimes, in a Shabbos drasha, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to quote something out of left field. That's not from the sources, but it's going to make a point, right? You're going to quote a song from Nomi Shemer. I'll say this Shivcha on a 20th yard site now, that, Shirim or Shirei Kodesh. I mean, they were based on Yudah Levi, based on what's called Midrashim, and Chibat Haaretz and whatnot, and so on. But the text itself is not from Tanakh, and so on. Is it fair? Is it legitimate to use in the context of a drasha? Why not? That's fine. But in the context of liturgical use means part of the siddur. I wouldn't integrate a poem of any of the modern Israeli poets. I wouldn't do that because it has its time and place. And you'll see that the word kara means liturgical purposes. So if you look at source number 2, the Rambam says, Shibhu chachamim lemi shekorei. I emphasize, the Chachamim praised. Which Chachamim? He's referring to Rabbi Yossi of source number one, and that's the Rambam style in the Mishnah Torah, not to drop names, but even if it was one of the Chachamim, he gives it the plural because it was accepted. It was accepted, so it's not just Rabbi Yossi, it's everybody. V'shibchu Chachamim lemí shekorei zmirot misefer Tehillim b'chol yom v'yom mitihila leDavid ad sof hasefer. For those who say or sing the Psalms of David HaMelech, right, daily, Chol Dov Dor, from Tehillah leDavid. Tehillah leDavid is what we call Ashrei, but the third pasuk of Ashrei is actually a different parak. The first two pasukim of Ashrei don't belong to this parak. Ashrei Yishvei V'techa Yidul Chasela, Ashrei Yam Shekach Lo, Ashrei Yam Shadonai Lahav. That's three pasukim of Ashrei that were put there, and that's what I always say about many times. So we didn't go through kindergarten in this country, so we missed a great experience in life, because that's where our kids really become good kids in kindergarten. Afterwards, that's when they start going, off the derech. But the kindergarten teachers, so sometimes a kid will ask a question, kindergarten ganenet will say, kachazeh. That's the way. No, a kid will say kachazeh. Kid will say kacha, and the teacher will say, kachazet lo tshuva. Kacha is not an answer. And she's wrong, the kindergarten teacher. Why? Because it says, Ashrei ha'am she kacha lo. You see, the kacha is an answer. Right. So then you have these three introductory pasukim, but then it begins with Tehillah leDavid, which is the beginning of a section of Tillim. And take note, it's Aleph Bet. Aru mimcha b'chol yom gadol Hashem dor ledor hadar kvodecha vezud noretecha. That's how you can remember it by heart. Zecha raftuv chayabi chanun bracham to, and so on, until you get to letter Nun. It skips from Malchutcha, Malchut Kol Olamim, and you get to Somech L'chol Anoflim. What happened to the Nun? So Chazal say that Nun reminds us of Noflim, people who fall. And therefore, falling spiritually, that's not a good thing. It's a pasuk in Iyov with Nafel. So Chazal say, but David HaMelech picked up on it, Somech Hashem L'chol Hanoflim. Notice we get it on the rebound. In Somech Hashem L'chol Hanoflim, God picks up those who are fallen. Yeah. Two nuns up to, okay, fine. I don't get digress. Right? You see it was upside down? It's like the Rebbe in Cheder 150 years ago in Galicia. So he was reading the section of Parshat Shmini of the birds that were Tme'im, the Ofot Tme'im. And he gets to a duchifat. He never heard of a duchifat. We know what a duchifat is, but he doesn't know what a duchifat. So he has to give something. He says a meshigan, a fish. Okay. So a kid in the Cheder says, Rebbe, but it's the list of the birds. So the Rebbe thinks for a second. He says, I told you it was meshiga. It's in the wrong list, right? Meshigan, a fish. The Nun may have actually been there in David HaMelech's Tillim and been deleted by the Anshe Knesset Gdolah. How's that? How do I know that? Because we found versions of this parak of Tillim in the caves of Qumran, and there is a pasuk for Nun. Yep. So there are sources that have a Nun in this particular parak, and it's possible that Chazal had reason to censor it out. I don't know. The Gemara suggests a pasuk from Iyov, but I'm sure that's not what it was. The Gemara wants to say that it means falling, as it says in Iyov, no flay something. But then they came back and they said, this is what David HaMelech had in mind when he said, Somech Hashem l'chol hanoflim. God picks up those who have fallen. Fine. But nevertheless, there. I don't remember what the pasuk is, but I can. That's where we need Rabbeinu Google Shlita. I can get it. You go to Qumran, documents of Qumran caves and so on. There was a Sefer Tillim that was found from the one of the sects from the Qumran area, and they had Tillim with a pasuk Nun, with a verse Nun. So that's more likely that's what happened. But anyway, where do we say Tillim? From Tehillah leDavid until the end of Sefer Tillim. How does Tillim end? Kol haneshama talel ya haluya. My wife has a friend who has that pasuk as a first name by abbreviation. Kehatia is Kol haneshama talel ya haluya. No different than the family name of Kohanim, Azulai. This I heard from Avshalom Kor. Azulai, which is Lo pachot v'lo yoter. Isha zona v'chalala lo yikachu. All the psulei chitun of a kohen, that those who are kohens now allowed to marry. Isha zona v'chalala lo yikachu. Put it together, abbreviation. It's azulai. So not every azulai is really a kohen, because you know that not every Kohen or Kohen is a Kohen, not every Levi or Levine is a Levi, because things got messed up somewhere. But they were originally family names of Kohanim and Leviim, for sure. So we say Kol HaNeshamat Hallel Yahaluya twice. Why do we do that? Let me just stand on this point right now, because this is really important, even though we're coming to the end of the shir. Anytime we want to end a section of praising God, we know we're in big trouble, because the praise of God never ends. We say in Nishmat on Shabbat, Ilu finu malei shira kayam ulshonenu rina kamon galav v'siftotenu shevach k'merchaber rakia. If we had all the available everything to our disposal, ein anachnu maspikim lodot, we'd never get through. So you can't get through, how do you end? So why begin if you don't get through? So we have a gimmick, and the gimmick is to repeat the last pasuk twice, as if to say, continue, etc., etc., etc. So that's what we say. We say Kol Neshamat Hallel Yahaluya. That's why we say Hashem Yimloch Le'olam Va'ed twice at the end of Shirat Hayam, because those ending psukim are really psukim that are tacked on. We'll talk about it next week. But the Kol Neshamat, the Hashem Yimloch Le'olam Va'ed ends basically Shirat Hayam in the Chumash. So we say it twice, and that's why we double the psukim at Hallel at the end of Hallel. Otra Ke'anitani until Hodu Hashem Ki Tov L'Olam Chasdo, Hodu Hashem Ki Tov L'Olam. So it's as if we're saying to Kadosh Baruch Hu again and again and again. We really don't want to leave. We don't leave, except we have to go to work. So we have to end it somehow gracefully. So that's really the end of Sukkot Zimra. Everything, and you say I have an ending. Baruch Hashem L'Olam Amen V'Amen is like the end of a book. It's a bookend, the end of Tillim. So what happens afterwards? Baruch David and Shirat Hayam. So we're going to see next week what these add-ons are, but we're not through yet with this business of Kara, Kuf Reish Aleph, as opposed to Daled Reish Shin, Do Reish, which is Medrash, which is really Torah Sheba'al Peh. The difference between Torah Shebachtav, Torah Sheba'al Peh, as I mentioned already, Torah Sheba'al Peh is exhaustive. Torah Sheba'al Peh has to be understood. Torah Sheba'al Peh has nothing to do with Psukim. But Torah Shebachtav, the written law, has to do with Psukim. The question whether we're allowed to use extraneous material for purposes of liturgy. And we'll see, that's when the Rabbi Akiva said, if we af hakorei misfarim chitzonim, to use the books that were written in the days of Bayis Sheni, never put into Tanakh, we shouldn't be reading them. It doesn't mean we can't read them. Chochmat ben Sira, which was quoted by Chazal, the book of the Maccabees. There's a whole literature out there called Sefer Sfarim Achitzoniyim. So what about that? Rabbi Akiva didn't want that they should be incorporated in our liturgy. Afa korei misvarim chitzoniyim. That's what he meant. We'll see it next week a little bit more in depth, and then we'll show why there's a fundamental difference between the Pesukei Zimra and what exactly Pirkei Hallel is all about. As I already mentioned, that Pesukei Zimra can be said by individuals. We'll see the Rambam's point of view that Hallel should always be said in a community, in a tzibur, and why a perek becomes the basic unit, a chapter, and not psukim. There's something about the community that has something to do with saying a full perek with a chazan and kahal, a refrain, a chazan saying something, and then there is a refrain of the kahal, and that becomes the community saying Hallel, and it's not the individual who's saying Hallel. So we're going to use these pages next week. Again, if you want to give it back to me, I'll be happy to bring it next week. If not, don't forget to bring it next week. And so